All right, let's talk about the War of 1812. You know, it's one of those conflicts we remember for a few key moments. But the real story, the fascinating part, is why it even started. Today, we're going to unpack that, this complex, almost unavoidable collision between a young United States and the global superpower of Great Britain. And we'll be doing it through the sharp, strategic lens of Captain A.T. Mahan.
I mean, it really boils down to something this simple and this dramatic. You've got one nation, Great Britain, fighting for its very survival against the Napoleonic Empire. And then you have another, the United States, fighting for its honor, for its very right to exist as a truly sovereign nation on the world stage. This is the story of how those two fundamental needs put them on a collision course. So the first thing you have to understand, and this is a crucial point Mahan makes, is that this war wasn't about a single incident. It wasn't just one ship firing on another that kicked the whole thing off. No, this was a deep, fundamental clash of national interests that was playing out every single day on the high seas. Mahan just nails the American position with this quote. He says the U.S. took its stand resolutely upon the supremacy of its own municipal rights on board its merchant shipping on the high seas. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, put simply, an American ship, no matter where it was in the world, was considered American territory, a little floating piece of America. So an attack on its crew or its cargo, that was an attack on the United States itself. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. You have two completely irreconcilable worldviews. For Great Britain, who's locked in this death struggle with Napoleon, the seas are a battlefield, period. Survival is everything, and controlling the ocean to strangle France is the one and only priority. Everything else comes second. But for the young United States, the seas were a superhighway for commerce, the absolute lifeblood of their new economy. They truly believed that their rights as a neutral nation had to be respected. They couldn't just be ignored. So this big clash of principles needed a spark, right? Well, it had two fuses that were burning down fast. One was incredibly personal, the human cost. The other was all about the money, the economic cost. Let's look at the kidnapped sailors and the captured cargo that pushed America right to the edge. Just look at how differently each side saw the exact same actions. From the British perspective, impressment wasn't kidnapping. It was simply taking back their own deserters to man the Royal Navy. For them, it was a military necessity. But for Americans, it was the kidnapping of their own citizens from their own ships. It was an absolutely intolerable violation of personal liberty and a massive blow to national honor. And it's the same story with trade. Britain's orders in council were just a tool of economic warfare against their mortal enemy, France. But for the U.S., it felt like Britain was treating them like a colony again, illegally seizing their ships and telling them who they could and couldn't trade with. But, and this is a critical wrinkle that Mahan points out, America was not on the same page about this at all. You had incredibly influential people like Gouverneur Morris, one of the founding fathers, who thought going to war over all this was, in his words, downright madness. He and a lot of others actually thought Britain had a point, that they had a right to reclaim their sailors. This deep internal division is so key to understanding why the path to war was so long and complicated. So, before they resorted to cannon fire, the United States decided to fight with a totally different weapon, its own economy. The administrations of Jefferson and Madison basically made this huge gamble that they could force Britain to change its ways without ever firing a shot. The official strategy was called commercial coercion, and the core idea was pretty simple. As you can see here, the belief was that American trade was so vital to Great Britain that if the U.S. just turned off the tap, withheld all that commerce, it would force a change in British policy. It was meant to be this powerful, peaceful alternative to all-out war. And boy, did they try to make it work. They kept escalating their policies every time the last one failed. First step was the Embargo Act of 1807, which was just this incredibly drastic measure to halt all international trade. When that totally backfired, they tried the Non-Intercourse Act, which was a bit more targeted, only at Britain and France. Then came Macon's Bill No. 2, which was this really complex maneuver trying to play Britain and France off against each other. But here's the bottom line, none of it worked. Great Britain, fighting for its life, simply refused to budge. And who was the primary victim of America's economic war? Well, it was America. Just look at these numbers. U.S. exports absolutely collapsed, plummeting from over $100 million to just $7 million. As Mahan shows us, the strategy didn't just fail to pressure Britain, it absolutely devastated American prosperity and crippled the government's own revenue. It was a disaster. Okay, so with economic coercion a complete failure and the nation's honor hanging by a thread, the final diplomatic efforts got tangled up in deception, stubbornness, and just plain bad timing. War was quickly becoming the only option left on the table. It all came to a head in this perfect storm. Three things happened. First, Napoleon, being the brilliant strategist he was, completely tricked the United States by pretending he was repealing his own trade restrictions. Second, Britain, with its back against the wall, refused to give an inch on issues it saw as absolutely vital to winning the war and surviving. And finally, the American government, feeling outmaneuvered, humiliated, and just plain out of options, saw war as the only path left to really prove it was a sovereign nation. And so, with war as the chosen path, the stage was set for one of history's greatest, most tragic ironies. On June 18th, the U.S. declares war. Just 5 days later, on June 23rd, the British government, finally buckling under immense economic pressure at home, formally revokes the orders in council. That's one of the key causes of the entire war gone. But this is 1812. News traveled at the speed of a sailing ship. The message just didn't get there in time.
So when you look back on this whole cascade of failures, miscalculations, and terrible timing, what was Captain Mahan's final verdict? How did he explain this tragic and maybe avoidable collision?
Mahan's assessment is just razor sharp. The core British mistake was this presupposition that, quote, America might argue and threaten, but would not fight. They looked at this young, divided, militarily weak nation and simply could not believe it would ever actually pull the trigger and go to war.
So in the end, this was a war born from mutual miscalculation. Both sides got it fundamentally wrong. The Americans mistakenly believed that economic pressure alone could bring the world's greatest naval power to its knees, while it was in a fight for its very survival. And the British, well, they fatally underestimated that a rising nation, no matter how unprepared it looks, will eventually fight to defend its honor and its sovereignty.
And all of this leaves us with Mahan's timeless question, one that echoes from the decks of 19th century warships all the way to strategic discussions happening today. When does economic pressure fail? And when does military power become the only answer? The War of 1812 offers no easy answers, only a really powerful lesson in that dangerous space between national interest, national honor, and the tragic, tragic cost of getting it wrong.